Welcome to Writing on Caffeine, the podcast where you can come along on a journey with a father and daughter as we attempt to write our first novels. I am Jonathan Franzone, and this is my daughter.
Hello, I'm Reagan, also Franzone.
Last time we met at my house because of some scheduling conflicts, but today we are back at the Coffee Break Cafe. I am drinking just a regular coffee. I think it's a light roast, but it's got sugar and cream. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a salted caramel white mocha.
Ooh, that sounds yummy.
Yes, it's very good.
We are also recording a week later than our usual 2-week interval. We had some illnesses in the family right after Thanksgiving.
That's my bad.
Yeah, so you had the flu, I think?
Yes.
And then it trickled over into the rest of us. I did not get sick, thankfully. Today we would like to talk about writing dialogue and why it is the worst.
The worst.
So some things to get the ball rolling. A rule or guideline called show, don't tell. And so that seems kind of opposite from writing dialogue because it sounds like you're just wanting to write what they're doing and then not have them talk, but in fact that's not what they're saying. You could have a character showing and not telling in a scene through dialogue. For instance, you could have a character say, "I'm really angry."
Short and to the point.
Right. That's not helpful because it's very plain.
Yeah.
And
people don't say that.
Right. People don't say that. They're just telling you that they're angry. Rather, you should have your character say something that indicates that they're angry. Similar to like when you're driving a car and someone cuts you off.
Yeah.
You might say something that indicates that you're angry.
Why are we stopping? Move!
And then also there's the issue of attribution. I don't know how you do this. I've experimented with different techniques. Attribution is basically he said, she said, etc. Mm-hmm. So there are different ways to do that. What's your thinking on attribution?
I think as a reader, definitely short and sweet is better. However, as a writer, I fail to adhere to that, and then I'm always like adding action on the end of dialogue, which is really annoying, and I plan on fixing it. But that is something that I struggle with because in my head, when I'm writing a scene and I'm writing dialogue, I want to know what the characters are doing.
Right.
But at the same time, when you're having a conversation with someone, most of the time you'll like stop and talk to them instead of like, unless you're running from someone or
right
in the middle of something incredibly important.
Yeah, it could be helpful in cases like, for instance, the angry instance. You could have your character yell at somebody and then describe them throwing something across the room and then continue their tirade.
Right.
Which could be part of the showing, not telling that they're angry, really angry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way when I'm reading. I like it short and sweet, like he said, or even no attribution at all.
Yeah.
But when you write, you tend to like want to add a lot of like, he questioned curiously because you want your readers to, know that he was curious. Or one I've got is he grumbled as he stomped from the room. And as a reader, like when I run across those, it just kind of pulls me out of the story a bit.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, why is this sentence still going on?
And then also, in the instance of this, he grumbled as he stomped from the room. Now I'm imagining someone dramatically stomping their feet as they're like walking out of the room. Not even just like angrily walking away. My brain's like knees like up to ears, stomping onto the ground. So that pulls me out of the story too.
Right. Well, that may be the effect the author was intending. So.
I like the no attribution too. And something or an instance that I remember reading it or listening is actually, I think in the Chronicles of Narnia, they do this a lot. Yeah. They do no attribution. And being that I had it read to me the first time, so
You're welcome.
Thank you. You were seeing who was talking, and so you were kind of doing voices. Right. So it made the story flow really well just hearing the dialogue.
Yeah. It's like watching a movie. When you're watching a movie, that there's no he said, she said.
Right.
You're just watching people talk. And so if you can do that in writing, or if you're reading a book that does that well, it really keeps you plugged into the story, I think. And I've experimented with that in some of my writing. I think we want to talk about our writing a little bit, but before we do, I want to point out this thing I ran across on a podcast. I can't remember the name of the podcast right now, but the guy was called the Dialog Doctor, and I can't even remember his actual name, just that he was the Dialog Doctor. And one of the things that he talked about was when you're writing dialogue, you don't want all of your characters to sound like flat versions of you, the author.
Yeah.
So if you don't put any thought into it, all your characters will just be saying things that sound like the way you talk.
Right.
And so his fix for this, he talks about voice modulations. So this is just the way we naturally speak in different contexts. So if you can imagine ordering a coffee, like we just did not too long ago, you're going to speak to the person at the counter different.
Yeah.
You're probably just going to give your order and that's it. And maybe, how's your day going or whatever. But if you then walk away from the counter and you get a call from your mother or your wife, you're going to talk to that person a lot differently.
Right.
So he says you could actually create a chart with your different characters, or at least the main characters, and write down some of the different voice modulations that character may have. So are they speaking to a fellow character that they're journeying with? Are they speaking to an enemy? Are they speaking to strangers? And then from there, you can kind of plot out how their voice patterns change. So what words do they use in different contexts? For instance, if we're all sitting around at a family meal at home, we might use much different language than we would at church.
Yeah.
We're much more casual, and some of the jokes may not be necessarily appropriate for all contexts. Body language, he even talks about writing down what kind of body language. So does this character pull at their hair all the time, or, I don't know, pick their nose? And then,
fling their hands around, talk with their hands.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people do talk with their hands. He also talks about cadence, so how fast are they talking? So if your characters are running through the woods being chased by a demogorgon, they're going to speak a lot faster than they would if they're just relaxing in the fort and talking about, I don't know, D&D.
Yeah.
Little Stranger Things reference. And then finally there's pacing. So I guess, how you pace out the conversation. Are they cramming a lot of information in or parsing it out slowly?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And I heard about this and I haven't done any of it, so.
Yeah, no, I'm just like taking in all this information because I'm like, I am so bad at this, writing dialogue.
Yes, I also am terrible at it. That's all we have from the Dialog Doctor. I will post a link to his website in the show notes because he's got several spreadsheets actually that you can download for free.
Oh, lovely.
And plug in your characters and how they talk and all that. Might be helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about a piece of your writing and my writing that we've tried to experiment with dialogue on and how it went or how it didn't go.
Yes. Okay. I'll talk about my first chapter because it's something I've been struggling with. Because initially, I just dumped a bunch of words that didn't necessarily go together on a page and then moved on. Because so many people say, just get the first chapter over with and move on. But then I kind of shot myself in the foot because I didn't really give myself anything to push off of. And so I've been going back and rewriting it. The first time I wrote it, I had actually almost all dialogue and very little action. And then the second time that I've gone back and written it, I've had almost no dialogue and like all description and internal thought, which is how I as a person kind of experience life. I think when I'm in new situations or in groups, I tend to have more internal dialogue with myself
right,
instead of actually participating in the conversation. And so I'm writing this character, and I'm like, oh, she needs to talk to somebody, or else she's just going to be like standing in the middle of action and not doing anything. So
Right.
I think it will be easier once I go back to second draft to kind of merge those together and make a more even type of chapter.
Yeah. Speaking of internal dialogue, have you experimented with writing out thoughts, like having your characters think things?
Yes. I do that a lot, actually,
Oh,
which
okay.
is probably way over the top.
Way over the top?
Have you?
I have not in my actual writing, but I was reading something the other day from Brandon Sanderson, actually, and what he does is he just italicizes internal dialogue.
I was going to ask you about that, because some people will italicize and some people actually put it in quotes.
Yeah.
And I find the quotes to be confusing.
Yeah, I like the italicization. I don't know how to say that.
Italicized?
Putting it in italics.
I
Yeah, because
prefer
it
that.
separates it from dialogue, but you can tell it's not just narration.
Yeah, I
And then
agree.
he usually actually attributes it at the end, like, comma, he thought,
Yes.
something
yeah.
like that. Your instinct was initially heavy on the dialogue, and then the pendulum swung to the opposite
Yes.
end. I actually started out the other way, so my first scene was a chase scene, and so it was all action.
Right.
And I've got these bullies chasing this kid, and they're just jumping over roofs and stuff. So when I came to my second scene, I decided I needed some more dialogue. So that's when I really started having to work through some of these issues. And one of the things that I've found that I really do like is the no attribution. I'll have two characters in a scene. One of them is, I'll be describing from the point of view from the main character and describing something he's doing, and then he speaks, and you know it's him speaking because of what he was just doing.
Right.
And then you just have the other person respond, and you can tell it's them responding. And then kind of interspersed in that, you may drop in an attribution just to make sure it's clear.
Right. Or if they're doing something like with a certain tone
Right.
that needs to be communicated.
Yeah. And a lot of it you can do with, sort of like we mentioned earlier, having the action interspersed with dialogue. So he may say something.
And then roll his eyes.
Right. So, and then he rolls his eyes, or he picks up this rock and throws it or something. You can tell I like throwing things. I seem to use that as an example a lot.
Yeah.
And actually I do have a scene with a character throwing a stone, so that these two characters are walking up to a bridge. The main character is being trailed by this younger character who he doesn't want to be along, and she's just kind of nagging him. I try to use a little bit of this dialogue difference, the modulation. So the character that's tagging along, she's very nagging, and she just uses a lot of words.
Yeah.
And is asking him a lot of questions, and he just gives like short answers and is trying to get her to go away. And so then he's picking up a stone and like chucking it across a creek out of frustration.
Yeah. Another thing that I've done is writing a whole scene with just dialogue and only separating. You add a space and then you just start writing the next character's dialogue with absolutely no description or action attached to it.
Right.
And then going back in and adding that sometimes helps if I'm struggling with dialogue.
Interesting.
So if I'm writing a scene that's all description,
Right.
I'll start doing that, and it kind of evens itself out.
Yeah, almost like a screenplay. Just kind of put their name, colon, and then what they say.
Right. And if you can't tell, I'm kind of like an all or nothing kind of person. I'm like, it's either like all dialogue or like all description. So it's something I definitely need to work on.
Right.
Which is why writing dialogue is the worst.
Yeah, I think it may be the worst. It is very difficult.
I feel like I'm really good at describing things, and I'm even good at internal dialogue, talking with yourself, logically processing things. But then when it comes to talking to other people, I'm very much at a loss.
Right. Yeah, I feel like some of my descriptions are pretty bad, too. Like I was just trying to describe something that was kind of magical, but also technology driven, and I don't even know how to describe. I can see it in my head, but I don't know what words to put on the page to make it appear the way it is in my head. Maybe we'll have to do an episode on that as well.
Yes.
What books are you reading or still reading, or have you moved on to reading?
Well, I finally finished The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson.
Awesome.
Which I have been reading since the beginning of this podcast. It was good. I was glad that I finished it. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson is an incredible author, and he's just incredible. Every time I read something by him, I'm like, I wish I could be like him. He's so good. I'm still reading The Shadows of What Was Lost.
Right.
That is a big book. Really big. So I'm still working through that one. It is an epic fantasy. So there's a lot of characters moving all at the same time. There's a lot of locations and things happening and a lot of history that I'm like trying to absorb.
Right.
So I'm reading that one kind of slow. And then I'm also reading Divergent right now, which is that dystopian novel that was popular back in like 2010. Because I never read it before, and one of my friends was talking about it, and I was like, I think I have that book somewhere. I'll just pick it up and quick read it.
So I'm still reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and Anti-Fragile by Talib. But last time we talked, and you brought up using some lighter reading or a shorter book to intersperse with the longer books, which I took your advice. So The Lost Metal from Brandon Sanderson in the Mistborn series, it's the latest book, came out, and so I picked that up and started reading it. It's not exactly light reading. It's pretty hefty.
Yeah.
It's about 600 pages.
Brandon Sanderson typically is kind of heavy reading.
But it is fun. So I've been reading that a little bit interspersed with the other two books, and it's, as always, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us in this fourth episode of Writing on Caffeine. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks. Please visit the website, writingoncaffeine.com, where you can find the show notes and subscribe so that you never miss an episode.
Bye.
Bye-bye.